Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and we are going to be talking today to Anadel Barbour about EMDR and how it is used to help treat people with trauma. That it's a technique which is much quicker than talk therapy and really gets into reprogramming the brain to deal with the trauma that has happened in the past. It began with, well, she's going to talk about how it began, but it really started a lot with soldiers and PTSD, but it's now a regular part of many therapists' repertoire, and it's a very powerful technique. I was turned on to Anadel by a friend of mine who's been going to her and having tremendous results. He was raised in a cult and had some pretty powerful traumatic experiences there, and he suffered quite a bit as an adult and is now finding that this EMDR therapy is helping him tremendously. He is not reactive in the way that he was, and the things that used to really get to him are not. And so I'm seeing a big change in him, and so I said, hey, what are you doing? What's going on? And he told me, so I contacted Anadel, and she said, sure, come on in and let's talk about this. So let's find out exactly what EMDR is and how it works. This is Anadel Barbour. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I am so glad. I'm good, and I'm so glad that you agreed to do this because I was interested in EMDR, which I know a little bit about, but just assume I don't know very much at all. So first of all, let's just start with what those initials stand for.
Okay. Most people know a little bit about it these days. It's pretty popular. EMDR. E stands for I, M stands for movement, D stands for desensitization, and R stands for reprocessing.
Okay.
So EMDR is a type of therapy that focuses on targets of trauma, meaning you focus on a trauma. And then you do this eye movement back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you focus on the trauma and do the back and forth eye movement, it desensitizes and reprocesses it for you. So I'll get into that later.
Okay.
And Francine Shapiro, who created this type of psychotherapy, wishes she didn't put the EM in it because now Jump 2, she started it in the 80s. Jump to now, we do this bilateral movement, like the eyes going back and forth, in many different ways. And so you can do it with back and forth sounds. You can do it with back and forth tapping on your knees. We also do hand stimulators. So you hold them and they buzz back and forth and vibrate in your hands. So it's the idea is bilateral brain stimulation focusing on a trauma. So that's what it is.
So the whether it's sound or sight, you're creating almost like a hypnotic state is what it sounds like to me. Like you're changing the brain waves by having this repetitive movement. Is that what
Well, it's not a hypnotic state because
Okay.
you are completely aware. So let me just do some blah, 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 which
Okay.
is kind of boring. But
I like the boring
but
stuff.
fascinating.
If it's educating, boring is good.
So our brain has basically three parts. There's the brain stem, which is the reptilian brain, the limbic system, which is our memory and emotions and things like that. And then we have the neocortex, which is our frontal lobe. And for humans, in the midst of all that, in the limbic area, is the amygdala. And the amygdala is what is like our SIM card. So it remembers everything as it is originally experienced. And so, let's see, how can I segue into this? So with the bilateral brain stimulation, when you do the back and forth sounds or movements, tapping, it activates the triune brain, the three parts of the brain. And so the way that it was maladaptively remembered in your mind will then reconstruct it for you and reprocess it so that it no longer has the charge.
So as the therapist, while this is going on and the person are they talking the trauma through?
No.
Or thinking about it?
So the good thing about EMDR therapy is it's not talk therapy. It's not like, psychotherapy where you might be in therapy for years and years and years, which there's nothing wrong with that. But that only focuses on the cognitive. So when you activate the three parts of the brain at the same time, you're getting cognitive, you're getting somatic, and you're getting emotional, right? And so what happens is we only need to know like a newspaper headline about the traumatic incident. We never do any reprocessing until we do a whole lot of setup for a few sessions. And the setup has to do with finding the newspaper headlines and then exploring with the client some beliefs that came from that. And then we also do a lot of what we call resourcing. This is EMDR language, but the resourcing is to make sure the client can self-regulate their emotions.
Okay.
Okay, so what we do is we start out finding out what their support system is. And that could be, if they're sober, 12-step programs. If they're not, maybe a religious thing that they do. If they're in church. If they're not, what kind of friends they have. What they do for a living. Do they have family that they're close to, friends, things like that. We also do resourcing in the spiritual nature or the meditative nature. If it's not a spiritual program, some people like to meditate just to get, they don't call it a spiritual program, but they call it their connection to themselves. And so what we will do is find out what those are. We also have many that we know are effective ways of helping people calm themselves. So EMDR therapists are trained to learn different types of self-soothing methods that we install with bilateral brain stimulation into the client's psyche. And so after a few sessions with that, we dig into the traumas.
Oh, okay. So there's a little bit of laying of groundwork of how this works.
There has to be, yes.
Right, that would make complete sense.
Right. Yeah. And so you asked, do they talk? Do the clients talk? So a session goes more like this. Once we set up the trauma target and find out what the emotion was, the level of the distress that it brings to the client, it is measurable. We scale it from 0 to 10. We also find out what their preferred belief would be, which is a positive belief, usually opposite of the negative one, like I'm powerless, or I'm not enough, or I don't trust anyone. So you would look for the opposite of that. And we measure that. And so the goal of the EMDR therapy is to take the distressing feeling and take it from a 10 down to a 0, and then take the positive one and take it from a 1 to a 7. And so the process is a stop and go. So we would set up the target, the emotion, where are you feeling it in your body, the levels of the distress and the positive belief. And then we start the bilateral brain stimulation. So the bilateral brain stimulation goes, it's not in minutes, it's called passes. It's a number of passes. So if I'm doing eye movement, it's a number of passes back and forth with the client focusing on that moment in time. After 35 passes, I stop. And then I ask the client, what are you noticing now? Or what's coming up for you right now? It's an open-ended question, so the client can then answer whatever they're experiencing. It could be memories. It can be just flashes of images. It could be somatic. It could be all of it. And then I stay out of the way, and I just say, go with that. And we do it again, 35 passes. And that could go on, for 10 passes, for 15 passes. It just depends. And when you get to a certain amount, like 10 minutes left in session, you check in with the client and ask them, what is your distress level right now? And if it's gone down, bravo. We ground the client with some of the things we taught them before we started focusing on the traumas. And then after the reprocessing happens, the brain keeps going. And so we let the clients know that your brain is going to keep reprocessing for a while. So pay attention to what comes up. Connect with your support system if you need to. And when they come back the next week, we check in with them. Where is your distress level when you think of that particular trauma at that particular day? Last week you ended at a 5. Where is that now? And sometimes it disappears. I've had that happen many times.
That's extraordinary when you think about something, that's probably controlled a person's life or influenced it negatively for decades, possibly.
Yes.
An incident. I was talking to somebody yesterday. I'm going to tell you something about myself that I remembered. I don't know where this is going to go. I've always had this idea, this idea that I will do anything not to be embarrassed or humiliated in public in front of people.
But you were a stand-up.
But I was a stand-up, so I controlled the situation when I was a stand-up. If I make people laugh first and I control the laughter, I'm not humiliated. I run it. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different in that way, But I had an incident, and I'd forgotten about it. But I was telling a guy I was talking to yesterday. I said, when I was a kid, I was about 9, and we had this class thing where we went to somebody's house, and there was a game we were playing in which you were eliminated by not catching a ball, and then at the end of the thing. Now, why these teachers did this was ridiculous. I don't know why, but if you got eliminated, you had to go through the legs of everybody would line up, and they would paddle your butt as you went through, which was not a huge deal until this one kid hit me super hard, and it hurt, and I got mad, and I started to chase him around, and I couldn't catch him, and I fell, and I started crying, and everyone was laughing at me. Okay, so I made a decision. I will never, ever let this kind of thing happen to me again. So I, consequently would not participate in things that I thought could risk that. Mm-hmm. I would, catch people, try to make them off guard so I wouldn't ever be caught off guard. Sarcasm became a big part of my
defense mechanism.
Yeah, my bag of tricks. And it is interesting that I went into stand-up where, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to be the fool by choice, so I can't be the fool because it's what I but I also love it. It's also that too.
Sure.
So I was telling somebody about it yesterday, and as I was talking about it, I could see it, I could feel it, And I said, the interesting thing is I'm the only one that remembers this. No one remembers it except for me.
Right. And it affected you.
And it affected me. And it's not even that huge. It doesn't rule my life. I don't get it, but there are times I have a visceral reaction to feeling, like making a mistake and getting laughed at. It's like a real, unless 99% of the time, not a big deal now, but it was a thing that when I think about it, it was a big influence on me for a long time.
Sure. And what did it make you believe about yourself?
Well, that I was vulnerable in the world, and I could basically be humiliated and destroyed at any moment without warning.
Okay. And so if this was something that was really causing you a lot of problems now, and even now we could do a reprocessing session on it, because...
Oh, I'm sure it would be, because yesterday when I was telling this guy about it, I was like...
Live it.
Oh, I was so upset with,
right.
But I could feel the warm tears running down my face and trying to stop them, and I couldn't, and thinking everyone in my class is looking at me like I'm a complete, whatever, loser, pathetic person, coward, whatever, whatever the words were. It was amazing that it just, that's why I find this fascinating, because it was such a strong thing. It's 55 years later. It happened like 55 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that's what people walk around with for those many years. And so now we're talking about, when EMDR was first came about, the woman, Francine Shapiro, was working with war veterans with PTSD. And so those were very specific traumatic events.
Yeah, real big ones.
Now we know, jumping now up into this day and age, there's something they call complex PTSD. And so many people, if not all, and it's all relative too, which I can get into later, have suffered some chronic stuff. If you grow up in poverty, if you grow up in a gang neighborhood, if you grow up with parents that don't have good attachment, as they say, that they're workaholics or rageaholics, things like that.
So you have just chronic
and it's
abandonment.
years. And so EMDR is very effective with that as well. It's just picking different targets. It might be picking a theme more than a specific event, and reprocessing it. And that's the goal. And the thing about it, it's not hypnosis, because you don't go into this hypnotic state, because we keep checking in with our clients. And the deal is you don't forget what happened. The beauty about this is that when you think of it again, it doesn't bring you those tears and that rage that you were talking about. It's just an event back in time. Animals have fight or flight, and we have fight or flight. But animals, a deer are eating leaves off the ground in the woods. When they hear rustling, their fight or flight will come up. It's a squirrel, no big deal. After 3 or 4 squirrels, they'll still look up. One time it's a bear, and they run and they hide and they do whatever they have to do. And it takes them about an hour, and they self-regulate, and then they go back to eating. They don't think of it again. They don't go, that damn fucking squirrel, man. Oh, my God, did you see that bear? I thought it was a...
Right. And the next day, the deer goes, I wonder if that bear's coming again. It probably is. I'm not going to enjoy my meal as thoroughly as I could.
And because of our neocortex, the frontal lobe, we put a meaning and an emotion and attach it and bring it with us for every rustling of leaves, as they say. And so we get incongruent reactions to things for a very long time. And so that's what it really helps. And what was happening to you when you were feeling that anger and the hot face and the tears and all that stuff? Your fight or flight was being activated again.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens physiologically when your fight or flight comes in? This shuts down the frontal cortex. It does that to protect us. You don't have time to think. Get the hell out of here. But for humans, we don't need that anymore. And so our rational thought goes away. And so that's why it's important to learn how to self-regulate so you can bring yourself back to rational thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. What are some of the self-regulating techniques that you talk about?
It's a lot of mindfulness, meditation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's body awareness. It's breath awareness. There are, you sit formally, and we ask that the clients really do these formal practices so that when shit hits the fan when they're out in the world, in the informal practice, they can bring themselves into a self-regulated state anytime, anywhere. So breath awareness. It's about breathing in slowly, breathing out slowly. If your thoughts go somewhere else, just bring it back right here to the breath.
Mm-hmm.
There's some physical things that are very helpful. Something called lion's breath. You take a big inhale, and then when you exhale, you kind of throw your head back and let it all loose.
So through your nose or
through
mouth?
Your mouth.
All through the mouth.
So they call it a
Yeah. So in through the nose and out through the mouth.
Yes.
And I do that without not knowing what that is, but
Well, if you do it a few times and pay attention, it relaxes your central nervous system.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll put a sound to it also.
Yeah. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
The type of resourcing that I've learned is through Emdr, which is the EMDR Association in the United States. And there's something called the Meta Protocol, METTA. And so we do a lot of metta meditations. They're heart practices. So you'll set an intention of compassion or loving kindness or, equanimity or whatever you need, calm, safe. And so we do guided imagery or intention-led meditations. And then I myself, I always send my clients the phrasings that I've used so they can practice it at home.
So there's some homework to speed up the healing.
Well, it solidifies it more than speeds it up.
Okay,
right?
That's a better word. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing about EMDR too is the goal is that you don't have to be in therapy forever.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't mind if you want to pay me the money or whatever, but the goal is to not have to be tied to therapy.
Right, to walk around the world and feel comfortable.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's some of the things people can do at home. What can they can't actually do the EMDR at home much, right? Without some sort of a training, I would imagine you'd need something.
Well, that's true. And so they can do bilateral brain stimulation. And so because we're on radio, I can't really show you, but there's something called monkey taps or butterfly taps. And what our clients do is they take their right hand and put it on their left shoulder, and their left hand, they put it on their right shoulder, and then slowly tap back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you focus on your breathing and focus on the metta meditation phrases, or let me be calm, let me be safe, it installs that positive thing in your brain, and it's bilaterally stimulating it. Now, you can get EMDR apps now. Some people even order some of the buzzy things for their hands. You'd be surprised what people do because they really do like the sensation that happens. Now, when Shapiro discovered this, we talked about it a little bit earlier. She was walking. Well, walking bilaterally stimulates your brain. So she's working with these veterans, and she herself was diagnosed with cancer. So she had her own thing going. And when she was walking and thinking about all the stuff she was going through, one day when she got home, she found out she was thinking about it, but she wasn't upset about it anymore. And that's when she started getting the idea that maybe this bilateral brain stimulation can help these veterans. So she started working with not just walking, but tapping on herself and things like that. And that's how she discovered that if you think about the negative thing while you do this bilateral brain stimulation, it desensitizes it.
So she had some training, obviously, in knowing this information.
She knew about the brain.
Yeah. And then her own
experience.
issue. Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Yes.
Isn't that the way it is? The wounded become the healers.
Yes.
Wow. That's incredible that, though, she was able to go, well, I wonder what happened here. Let me think back, and maybe it's this. And then she experimented with it. I love that kind of stuff where people just go, wow, there was no real precedent for any of that.
There wasn't. That's why she wishes she could take the EM out of it, because even she didn't EM herself, right?
Yeah.
She was walking.
Walking, yeah.
But the EM helped her. It was something she could do with clients, right? And when you talk about taking it home, and I was just mentioning there's apps and things that you can get. And the apps have sounds and lights and all this stuff. But you have to look at them on a tablet. And so if you're not trained in it, I'm not sure it's really safe to think, well, maybe if I think of a trauma, I can feel better. Because once you stop, if it hasn't reprocessed and desensitized, you'll be activated. You'll be walking around.
That's what I would worry about.
Yes.
I would think like, I don't think I want to do this the first time by myself. I would want to know that somebody who's experienced a number of people and help them would be there to help me too. That's what I would want.
Well, and that's what we hope. I mean, we'll just be seeing re-traumatized people for years and years and years if this keeps happening. But
the danger
at
of
least
apps.
they'll be familiar with the bilateral brain stimulation, so less work for me.
So if somebody is, thinking about the trauma that they've had, and there's some absolutely horrific traumas that I'm sure you've, do people just like, I can't, they have to just stop. They can't take it. Like probably at first it must be so...
Well, that's why we absolutely really emphasize that it's not talk therapy, and we're not going to ask you to go there until we take you there.
Okay, so you have a sense of when the time is probably right. It could be
it's called
2 sessions or 5 sessions or whatever it is.
Well, it's called an 8-phase protocol.
Okay.
And so the first 2 phases are, taking a history from the client in a newspaper headline fashion about the traumas, and then also finding out their resourcing. And then in the second phase, we dig a little deeper into their belief system. Belief system.
I'm going to leave that in. I love mistakes. You know that?
That's fine with me. I'm human.
I made a decision a little while ago that I was going to make 3 mistakes a day.
Oh, that's good.
Minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really freed up the embarrassment thing. We were talking about...
the phases.
Yes,
this is important stuff.
Okay, it is. Okay.
There's an 8-phase protocol to it, and the first 2 phases set up, a rapport, obviously. But I get to know the client, and then I get to tell the client about how EMDR works, the psychoeducation about it, the bilateral brain stimulation, all that stuff that we've just talked about. When we get to the 3rd phase, that's when we know all the information we need to know. And so we begin the reprocessing. So the 3rd phase is asking the questions, what is the image? What is the belief you have? What is the emotion that you feel when you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then we talk about what would you rather think about yourself than I'm a loser.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ask, what sensations are you feeling in your body? We scale the emotions. We say put all those together, and now we begin. Hopefully, I mean, I've had a lot of success with a lot of clients.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing this when I was working in a rehab, refuge recovery, that was around, no longer around, but it was a Buddhist-based recovery center.
For drugs and alcohol?
Not 12-step, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so Steve Danziger, who was my trainer, he was the clinical director. And so the metta protocol, the meditation, the self-regulation, was already front-loaded, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
in the center. So it was a perfect place to be able to do trauma work on newly sober and clean addicts and alcoholics,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it was never believed that you should before. But because of the meditation, because of the breath awareness, because of the body awareness, every day, they're already resourced.
Mm-hmm.
So we could really work on the traumas, and people with addictions come in with a lot of traumas. So, you know.
So had you already studied this EMDR when you were working there? Or
I
you were
hadn't.
doing...
I was a therapist there, and
Okay.
and they required all their therapists to be EMDR therapists.
How
and
long
so
does
we
that,
took the training.
that training take?
Well, the training is in 2 phases. It's called basic training, and then you need 20 hours of supervision, and I had supervision there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great.
That's, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of backed into it. You didn't really...
Backed into it.
Yeah.
And I was one of those non-believers, if you want to know the truth. I just thought, okay, great.
Those make the best believers.
Mindfulness fixes everything, is what I believed, and it does. But it takes longer. This really does speed up the process.
And you had to probably undergo...
I did.
Yeah.
I have a few targets. as
Yeah,
they
of course.
say.
Well, I mean, we all do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know, like you... Oh, this is what I was going to ask you, because you were bringing it up about... I don't know how to word this. I have this idea that that everyone has some kind of trauma, and it's all sort of relative to what's happened to you.
Yes.
Like for me, that story I told you, kind of a minor story, but to me, it's, you know, it's not like, you know, I was in this horrible car accident, and it's every time I see a car, I freak out. It was a thing as a kid that most kids have, but to me, it's one of my bigger memories.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's nothing in my opinion, but compared to what other people have gone through, but relative to myself, it's one of the bigger ones. I mean, I have some other things too, but that's just something I remembered.
Right. And, you know, the fact is we're all human and we're all different. And so your experience in life being different than, let's say, mine or, you know, some gang member in South Central LA in 1982.
Or a soldier who's seen his friends getting blown up in front of him.
It doesn't mean that we don't grade the traumas. Well, you don't deserve EMDR because you don't have a big enough trauma. Because relative to whatever your life experience is, it's created a lot of chaos, right? So that's the important factor too, that it's what the client deems as a traumatic event, not what I decide is the traumatic event.
Right. See, I've already diminished it in explaining
exactly.
it. Yeah, because, you know, I don't want to look like a big baby.
Right.
And be embarrassed again. You know, what's one of the bigger sort of breakthroughs you've seen? Obviously, don't tell me any names, but
of course not.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest things that you've seen from maybe almost somebody who's almost debilitated by a trauma who is functioning at a really high level?
Well, I did have a client who witnessed her sister being killed by another family member. That's a pretty big trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And after 2 EMDR sessions, she was able to talk about it for the first time in her life. without having any kind of reaction. She didn't have to put it out of her mind. And she's gotten better in her life and her life skills, living, relationship. I mean, it's pretty astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, something like that would be it would just live in you in such an intense way, I would imagine.
Yes.
How old was she when it happened?
She was a child, 5 or 6, something.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, some people they get dealt things that are so out of their control.
Yes.
And you just wonder, like, that is, it's unfair, and it's just, just so strange that
Yes.
why them or why me for whatever,
Exactly.
And then you think, well, probably as a kid, it's like, well, it happened to me because it's supposed to, because kids don't know the difference.
Sure.
And so you live with that too. I probably deserved to see that in some way, or
Well, I think as beings, that felt really wrong.
yeah.
I mean, we know our experience, and so sometimes we assume, well, that's what you know because that's what you know. But there are some things that just feel wrong, like incest and things like that. Or when that boy hit you so hard, that's wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel correct. So we have some instincts about this too.
Yeah.
Which is part of why it's traumatic.
Yeah. I was I think I was mentioning this earlier. This book would really help me to kind of understand trauma, even though I didn't finish it, but it's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
And this is I'm trying to think of Bessel van der Kolk.
Van der Kolk.
Yeah. And he's I guess he's been studying trauma for, his entire life.
Yes, he's like a guru for the EMDR therapy world.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I didn't get that far into the book, but I was so fascinated by how people relive the traumas over and over again and how it lives in the body. I never really had looked at it like that, because you ever, know somebody and they have a reaction, you go, get over it. You just get
That's what people say.
You get impatient. You're like, you're smart enough to know that, every time that you, let's say, something bad happened on a Thursday.
Right.
It's
every
like,
Thursday.
Yeah, every Thursday you're freaked out, but you've had a billion Thursdays, and that thing didn't happen again. Why do you get nervous every Thursday? I'm just making something up,
Sure,
of course.
but that's a really good hypothetical example, because you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Because it's been buried for so long. And where is it in your body? Our whole body carries so many things we don't even realize. I've had a very sore left thumb for most of my life. So what's that all about? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really explored it. Someone said, oh, it's just arthritis. Don't worry about it. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Just haven't thought about it. But I don't have arthritis anywhere else, and it still hurts. So you never know.
And I guess that can be done with words too. It doesn't have to be necessarily an action. I was thinking about some of the things that my parents said to me growing up, that belief systems. Mm-hmm. Like my mom used to say, life sucks all the time.
So you believe it?
Well, kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't now, but that was, certainly riding underneath the surface.
Sure.
The only people that can be trusted are family members.
Mm-hmm.
These ideas that
that
may or may not be true.
Yes.
And believed to the core by the parent, and they impart that onto the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have. I love this because I used to make me laugh when I got older. When my mother would call me. The first thing she'd say after "How are you?" is everything under control. Okay. Yeah, isn't that and I remember thinking, why is she asking that? What is the?
Did you ever ask
her? What I said to her was, I think that might be an illusion. And she started to. She went, Yeah, I think you're right. And she never asked me again. It was really, I mean, it was a great moment that we had together. It was fear. She was so afraid of things getting out of control that her worldview was life is hostile and needs to be controlled.
Sure.
Which is probably pretty common, I would think. That one would be very common depending on your upbringing,
Yes. And, well, a lot of my clients have control stuff because, that was their defense.
The defense
I got to control stuff because something happened.
Some kind of chaos. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That happens often.
Yeah, I know someone whose mother was dying during a nice chunk of her childhood. So there was this unknown sort of death thing going on, and the mother eventually died, and she is an absolutely fastidious clean freak about her personal appearance. She's constantly, brushing lint off her clothes and licking her fingers and cleaning her shoes, and she's always doing these things. And I thought maybe that's from the, to feel control because she had this really big thing that she couldn't control. That's just my own sort of dime store psychology.
It could be. It could also be, and so that's why we talk and ask questions of people. It could be a soothing thing for her, a meditative state, because she did it for so long.
Oh, maybe.
So.
Okay, I like your answer better. What about dreams? Is that part of it? Do you do anything dream?
You
work?
can do dreams. Dreams. I don't analyze dreams, but they are part of the psyche.
Yeah.
They don't come up, though, necessarily in the reprocessing. Someone will come in and say, I had a dream and it really, really triggered me. So we'll use that as the target image.
Okay.
And so it doesn't really analyze the dream, but it will, the connection will be made in the brain where it wants to go. And that's the beauty of EMDR, too, because it's in the client's head.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we just allow it, it will make its connections because they've been stored incorrectly. And they want it. The brain actually wants to unwind it and put it in the right path. It just wants to.
The client is basically healing themselves.
Pretty much.
It's really another technique such as, meditation or whatever, the millions of techniques we have for thought management.
Yes.
Which is really what it all comes down to in terms of feeling good, I think. It's just, other than, actual physical discomfort, most discomfort that's is a thought. It starts with a thought.
Well, most of it is, and even if we're talking about physical pain management, a lot of healing comes from, and this is what I did even before I did EMDR. I had a teacher that used to say, embrace that shit.
Mm-hmm.
When you're feeling physical pain somewhere, Jon Kabat-Zinn, that's how he started his whole mindfulness-based stress reduction stuff. He was working with people that had chronic pain and nothing else worked. So he said, he was working in Boston Medical or something like that. And he said, let me help him. And they said, if you pay for it, you can do it. Right? And so he said, okay. And they said, but don't call it Buddhism. And so he called it mindfulness-based stress reduction. And
right.
he taught
we don't
them
want people running from the building.
And so he called it mindfulness-based stress reduction and helped people pay attention to their pain rather than push it away. And so that's what it is. It's paying attention, getting a new relationship with it. Physical pain, knowing it's there. Because once you really start paying attention to it, I had a cramp in my foot this morning. It was so bad. My toes were all, that, and you can't.
Yeah, like a Charlie horse.
Yeah, and it happens to me more often than not. And so I've learned, as painful as it is, I just say hello to it. And I can tell that it's not staying the same. So this teaches us impermanence.
Mm.
And so things flow. And so finally it went away. I don't even know how long it took, maybe a minute, maybe 10. But because I was focusing on it, it just wasn't that bad because I was having a different relationship with the pain.
Right, instead of trying to make it stop or
Yes.
waiting for it to stop or
Yes.
hoping it would stop
Yes.
or feeling like, not again.
And so that's what we teach people in the resourcing. You know, anxiety will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we say, look at your anxiety. Say hello to it. Where are you feeling it in your body?
So it's focusing on what is. What's the
Yes.
truth?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if somebody wants to find out a little bit more about this, do you recommend some either books or YouTube videos or what are some of the resources?
Well,
because I know a lot of people listen to this show, they want to find out a little bit more about stuff.
Sure. The Institute for Mindfulness in Ohio, Jamie Marish and Stephen Danziger are the trainers through that institute.
Okay.
And so Jamie Marish, M-A-R-I-C-H, I believe is how you spell it. She has a lot of YouTube videos.
Oh, okay.
Showing EMDR sessions or showing the resourcing exercises, the lion's breath and the taps and the breathing and all that stuff. So, or just go online and just put in EMDR. The thing is, there's a lot out there that they don't practice the protocol. And so it's just really important to be safe with it.
Yes, I would say. I was going to say that. Like the internet is great and it's not great. It's
yes.
A little knowledge or misknowledge they can both be kind of dangerous. So.
Yes, they can.
Is that even a word, misknowledge?
Well,
sounds
it
like
could be. We can make anything
winner.
up these days.
Sounds like a very smart pageant winner.
It does. It does.
Disinformation.
Misknowledge and miswisdom. Here we go.
I made up a word, so why not? Okay. What city in Ohio? Because I'm from Ohio.
I think it's Cincinnati. I don't want to say because I've never
Ohio.
been there.
Okay.
But the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, Jamie Marish.
Yeah. All right. Well,
and the Emdr site, EMDRIA.
Okay.
Emdr. It is a site with all the information you need to know about who are the certified EMDR therapists in the country.
Oh, so you could actually probably type in your zip code and find some people.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So people who are listening, if you have trauma and you're not having a lot of success, try this.
Try this.
Why not?
It works.
Yeah. I've heard, I have the way I met you is through a mutual one of your clients who's a friend of mine, and he said, I'm having some amazing results. And I said, I want to know more about that. So I actually know someone who's come to see you and had some great success. So that's enough for me as a guy that I trust. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And that's really what matters, is that people are experiencing success.
Yeah.
Success after being in therapy for so long, they finally found something that is making some change in their thought processes and the way they are operating in life. So it's great.
Yeah, we were out to lunch, our mutual person, and he said, he goes, I had this, I forget what it was. He goes, I had this thing happen, and normally this is how I would react. I'd freak out. I'd be like upset. I'd get in the car and I'd take a 5-hour drive. He goes, and I was like, so what?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
He goes, I didn't like it, but I was like, so what?
That's it.
And it was, he goes, so I guess it's working. I don't know. I go, well, I do, if that's what's happening. And he goes, yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah. So that's a good way to end the interview on an up note.
Yes, it is. Thank you
yeah,
so much.
Thank you. And I will send you a link to this when I edit it and put it up there on iTunes or wherever it goes. It goes to a bunch of places.
Great.
Okay.
And so my name, where I am, do you want to say that stuff?
Absolutely.
Or can I pitch myself?
Absolutely. Do you have a website? Anything you want to pitch, go.
AnadelBarbour.com is my website. Dr. Anadel Barbour. I'm in the Larchmont area of Hollywood, California.
Yay.
So look me up. I have a beautiful view of the Hollywood sign.
She does. It's a beautiful window. It's
Yes,
not.
it is.
Not a dark, dank, depressing therapist office. It's very bright and happy in here.
Yes, and people
Yes.
leave happier.
They leave happier.
That's what they've said.
Yes, I'm going to leave happier.
Good.
Okay, that was Anadel Barbour talking about EMDR, a pretty powerful technique, and I hope that if you're somebody who is suffering from some kind of trauma, and we all have it, we all have traumas, don't we? Maybe check this out. This may be a way to mitigate some of the issues that you might be having in your life. So check out EMDR. You can find a practitioner in your area, as they say. Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for listening to the podcast.